Well, welcome to South Hills. If you are new today, my name is Moses Camacho. I'm the senior pastor. You have walked into one of many of our locations. South Hills is one church in multiple locations, so if you ever decide to move, we still got you covered, okay? No matter what, once you're in this family, you're stuck in this family. So thank you for being here. We're in this series called TIL, Stress Do Us Part. And this series has been about how to deepen your relationships and how to make sure that you are learning how to manage the stress in your relationships, because one of the things that we've come to understand is that when relationships go south, and it doesn't matter which relationship it is, it could be your marriage relationship, it could be your relationship with your kids, it could be your relationship with your siblings, it could be your relationship with your friends or co-work relationships. Often relationships aren't necessarily ruined because of disagreements or because of different opinions or because of different values. In a world of 8 billion people and God intentionally not making anyone exactly the same, there's opinions that are different and different values and different beliefs in every relationship. So it's not necessarily your differences that make relationships go south. It's often little things that create moments of stress in our hearts and our lives that we don't know how to manage, and ultimately allow for those stress points to disconnect us in our relationship. And so the very first thing that I want to make sure that we understand, because this is the focus of who we are as a church, is that your primary relationship should be your focus with God. That should be your driving relationship in every relationship. Your relationship with God should be the avenue and the source that you use for every connection you have outside of your relationship with God. And the belief is this. The belief is that if your relationship with God is primary in your life, you're going to be allowing the Holy Spirit to be working in your heart, to be working in your mind, to create these things called fruit of the Spirit that ultimately are the ones that help you manage your mind and your thoughts and your decisions and your workload and your schedules. And what these fruits of the Spirit do is they allow things like love and joy and peace and patience and self-control to be the driving force of your day versus not having your primary relationship be a relationship with God and the fruits of the Spirit working in your heart. And now you're just allowing simply the schedule of the day to be the driving force and your to-dos. And so we really want to make sure that we understand that, your relationship with God is the secret to healthy relationships in other areas of your life. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 23, it says, "You say I'm allowed to do anything, but not everything is good for you. You say I'm allowed to do anything, but not everything is beneficial." And so one of the things that we've come to understand and stress do us part is that often what creates anxiety and stress in our lives are either some things called major stress, which are things that often we don't have control over, and then there's minor stresses, which often we do have control over. And from a psychological standpoint, when relationships have been analyzed and studied, they've come to understand that minor stresses are typically what creates the distance in relationships, not major stresses. And so what are the things that often have created these minor stresses in our lives? Well, I'll tell you right now, in Southern California, where there's way more to do than there are hours in a day, it's often the workload and the schedule that we put on ourselves. And it's not just from an adult standpoint, because adults do have schedules that are really heavy, especially if you have kids. Now that just adds to it. But even like when I look at my teenagers and I look at their schedule, if they have some sort of activity, whether they're in music or drama or sports, they have practices, they have schedules that they have to maintain, they have homework they have to do, they have 6 or 7 classes for things that they study. So it starts really early in Southern California. It starts really early in our country, because it is that mindset that you need to fill your schedule, you need to do more, you need to get ahead. And so ultimately we end up putting way more things on our schedule than there are an opportunity for us to allow God to speak into our hearts and our lives and not fall trapped to the things that are around us. So there's a difference between a full life and an overfilled life. And if there's something that I want you to walk away with today, is this statement right here, is that overfilled lives rob us from our primary relationship, which is your relationship with God, and ultimately rob us from the relationships in our lives. And an overfilled life is not a full life. And somehow, some way, many of us have come to wear the badge of honor by the busyness of our life. And when we share our busyness, it's kind of like something to be proud of, when in reality, it's not. Reality, from a biblical standpoint, you don't ever see Jesus just being so overwhelmed with his to-do list. You don't ever see Jesus just being so stressed out about his schedule. You don't ever see Jesus being like, listen, man, I just don't have time to hang out with you today. I just have way too many things going on. I got goals and dreams and ambitions that I need to pursue. And so, based off of my busyness of my schedule, I just don't have time for you. You don't ever see that. You don't ever see the story of Jesus just being so overwhelmed. But what you do see in the story of Jesus is that he knew how to manage his priorities. And he knew how to keep what was the main thing, his relationship with his Father and his goal of why he was called here on earth, and focused on people at the right time at the right places. And so if there's something I want you to walk away with today, is that there's a difference between a full life and an overfilled life. And we've been really kind of using this story of Esther in the Bible as a driving story for this series to help us understand kind of a visual picture of relationships. And in this story of the Bible, the book of Esther, it's Esther who was brought into a beauty pageant. And you read in this book that she was a beautiful woman, and she was brought into a beauty pageant because the king was ready to pick a new wife. Now, this is where it gets real life, okay? So the king ultimately had a wife, and the king already had a queen, but the king, because he was focused on the wrong things, and he put a lot of stress in his life because he wanted to show his wealth and his power, he had this gigantic banquet. And this banquet really gets into detail about who he invited, which in today's world, it'd be considered all the influencers, okay? In that time, it was like military, it was like politicians, it was, people with power and authority. So he invited all those people to come be a part of his banquet. And he gave them all you can eat, all you can drink, decorated, couches of gold and silver. Gave them, these cups to drink all the alcohol they could wanted, in these like gold cups. So he went above and beyond for this banquet that lasted 180 days. And this closing part of this celebration, he wanted to display his wife. He wanted to display his wife's beauty. Now, the Bible doesn't say exactly like what he wanted to display or how he wanted to display. All it says is he wanted her to wear the crown and then walk around and display her beauty. And she refused to. She refuses. She says, no, I'm not doing it. It's not going to happen. And so because she said no, he got really angry. He got really stressed out. He got really frustrated. He got really mad. And then he wanted to end the relationship and start a new one. Now, theologians believe that the reason she said no is because ultimately he might have been asking her to display herself in the nude. Okay? Now, you may think like, oh my gosh, who in the world in their right mind would do such a stupid thing to ask their wife to do this? Did anybody see the Kanye West social media going around this week? I mean, I was sitting there and I could not believe, because I will be honest with you, like when I read this and I'm like, what an idiot. Why in the world would he want to display his wife in a room full of a bunch of alcoholics who've had too much to drink, and it's just have his wife display in the nude? That's ridiculous. Who would ever do that? And then by the very next week, you see the Kanye West story, and I'm like, oh my goodness, we are so not far from these times. We still somehow, some way manage to bring these stories from the Old Testament that were thousands of years ago to life some way, shape, or form. So anyways, that's the story of Esther. That's the beginning of the story of Esther. So then ultimately he divorces her, he gets rid of her, and now it's time for him to bring a new queen. So he has this beauty pageant, which, let's just be real, it's kind of like the beginning of The Bachelor. It's like he brings in a bunch of girls, and he wants to pick his bride. It's like where The Bachelor got their idea, probably, okay? Now, nobody's probably seen The Bachelor, but The Bachelor is a show on television in today's time where there's either a guy or a girl who has all these dates, and they pick one, right? So that's what's going on here. And so he picks his bride. He sees Esther, and he falls completely in love with her. And the Bible says that he really loved her more than any other. And he had a lot of relationships, and he loved her the most. But like many relationships, There's a time of love. There's a time of closeness. There's a time of connection. And then life happens, and these minor stresses build up, and ultimately there's a disconnect. And then in this story, in the book of Esther, chapter 4, verse 11, there's a part where it says that they didn't speak for 30 days. And here's what it says, is all the king's officials had even the people in the provinces, had the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his scepter. And the king has not called for me to come to him for 30 days. So here's what's going on right now. We're in chapter 4. Esther's nationality, Esther's people, the Jewish people are in danger. The king's right-hand man wants them all dead. And so Esther's adopted father is asking her to do something about it. He's saying, listen, our whole entire nation is going to be wiped out if you don't go to the king. And she's saying, I can't go to him. We haven't spoken in 30 days. And they're married. The relationship that once used to be super close has gone 30 days with being disconnected. Now, let's just pause here for a second, because here's what we need to do. And anytime we dive into the Bible, whenever we look into what God has done in the past, we got to ask ourselves the question, how does this connect to us today? How does a relationship story from thousands of years ago connect to me today? Let's do this right now. Have you ever had a relationship with anyone? Boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, father, son, mother, daughter, friend, brother, sister, co-worker. Just think about your relationships. Have you ever had a friendship, a relationship, a marriage, a whatever? Start off great. Everything was a big party. Everything was fun and games. And then somehow, some way, something happened. And then something else happened. And then all of a sudden, that relationship is not as close as it used to be. And then all of a sudden, that relationship has a little bit of distance. And then all of a sudden, there's been several days that have gone by, maybe weeks, maybe months, where there's distance in that relationship. Now, don't raise your hand. But chances are, if you're living and alive and breathing and in this room, you probably have had that happen to you before. So this is exactly what's happening here. Now, how did it get to this point? Probably, just like many of our relationships, a stress point happened, a difference, an anxiety, a tension point, said something we shouldn't have said, focused on the wrong thing, and next thing we know, one thing after another starts to pile, and you start to create a disconnect. And the way I like to describe it when I meet with married couples, it's like being in a canoe. And you're in the canoe, and all of a sudden, you have this stress point that happens, whether it's who's doing the chores, or who's taking care of the kids, or who's going to pick up, who's going to drop off, who's going to pay the bills, whatever it is. Stress point happens, and all of a sudden now there's a hole in your canoe. And when there's a hole in your canoe, water starts to come in. And then you don't really focus on like what created the hole. You start to focus on who to blame for the hole. And then while you're focused on who to blame for the hole, another hole happens. Because I don't know if you've realized this, but life continues even when there's tension points. And so when there's tension points and life doesn't stop, what ends up happening? Another tension point arises. So now there's another hole in the canoe. Now there's more water coming into the canoe. And then now, instead of focusing once again on what's creating the holes in the canoe, you're focusing on who to blame and how to make sure the other person is responsible for the water that's in the canoe. And while that's happening, what happens again? Another. Oh, so you've been in a relationship before, all right? And so now there's multiple holes in the canoe, and the water is filling this canoe, and often the two people in the canoe are so focused on who is responsible for all the water that's in this canoe versus stopping back and taking a deep breath and trying to answer the question of what even created the hole to allow the water into this canoe. And that is a common problem in all relationships. Friendships, marriages, parenting relationships, that is a common problem. When we are stressed, not only do we not have time for each other, we don't always treat each other well either. And so there's a psychologist that likes to put pictures to these behaviors that happen in these stressful moments. And one psychologist, refers to these behaviors as fight, flight, or freeze. And the psychologist also likes to put visuals to it to have us better understanding for it. So he makes it a deer, a cobra, and a possum. And so many of us sometimes demonstrate one of these behaviors, or sometimes there's moments in our life where we demonstrate a few of these behaviors in different moments. So let me explain to you. You might be like the deer, okay? The deer represents what? The deer is an animalistic behavior that demonstrates or gives a visual of a flight response. A flight response is the moment you feel uncomfortable in a moment of tension or conflict. You feel uncomfortable. You are clocking the exits, meaning you're looking for a way out. You don't like to be in conflict. You don't like to have moments of conflict. You don't like to have conversations that create conflict. So when you feel like there's conflict or there's tension or there's going to be an argument, you're looking for the exit. How do I run from this problem? Your body feels restless. You want out of there. You want out of this conversation, the situation, maybe even the relationship. You'd rather do anything else other than deal with what's in front of you. Okay, that is the example of the deer, the flight. You're a runner, okay? Problem arises, your first reaction is, let me just avoid and just hope that it goes away all by itself, okay? That's the deer. Now, I don't know if that may be you, but we may have a deer in the room, okay? All right, now the other example is the cobra, okay? This is the fight example, okay? The cobra represents the animalistic fight response. This says you don't run from any threats, okay? You actually enjoy conflict. You enjoy fighting. We may have someone in the room that kind of is ready to fight at all moments of the day. We may have someone in the room, okay? It says you don't run from threats, you lash out at them. It's an intense anger that sweeps over you. You become tense and tight-jawed, and it says, and you're ready to attack the source of your discomfort. You argue, you mock, you belittle, you intimidate and threaten. Now, I don't know if you know anyone like this, but there's a close friend of ours that is in this family that I'm not going to call her out because she's a sweetheart. And but yeah, I just, a story that popped into my mind was last week we had some people over at the house, and she was over and she was talking about Christmas decorations, and she said, like, hey, do your neighbors, did your neighbors get mad at you for having decorations up? And I said, no, they're pretty easygoing neighbors. I said, they kind of leave me alone. And she's like, one of my neighbors tried to yell at me for having my Christmas decorations up, and I told him, you mind your own business. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Is that neighbor ever coming to our church? Yeah, probably not. So you might have this animalistic behavior where when you feel cornered, your reaction is to fight, okay? That might be a behavior, okay? The third one is this. The third one is the possum. The possum represents the animalistic freeze response. This person, stress makes you feel stuck. It fills you with dread. Your body clams up, shuts down. You are convinced anything you do will make everything worse. So you still see yourself, in moments to shrink back and become invisible. Often I like to use the example of paralysis of analysis, where there's like so many things running through your heart and your mind that you would rather make no decision than make a decision. And so these three behaviors are often found in us in moments of stress. When you feel stressed, you kind of gravitate to one of these naturally. You may have demonstrated one or two of these, but one of them is more natural to you than the other. So what does this mean? Well, first of all, it's important for you to know, which one are you? Are you the deer that immediately looks for the door anytime there's a conflict or a stress point or water in your canoe? Are you the cobra that's ready to fight and ready to defend your point and your opinions as soon as there's water in your canoe? Or are you the possum that just is overwhelmed by all the water in your canoe, where it's like, there's just so much water in this canoe, I don't even want to do anything. Like, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know where to begin. So it's important for you to realize, like, where are you in this story? What is your behavior? Because if you don't understand what your natural reaction is, you're going to go through life repeating the cycle. Instead of understanding like, hey, I'm a deer, before I go to run for the exits and know that every time I run, I'm not fixing the problem that's creating the water in my canoe, I should probably take a deep breath and have a conversation of what's causing this water in the canoe. Or if you're a cobra, before you go out and start lashing and start blaming and start, reminding the person of how they are the reason why there's water in the canoe, which you're probably right, but at the end of the day, it doesn't solve the problem. It's important for you to know. Like before I go and I shift all the reasons to this other person, I should probably take a deep breath and figure out a nicer way of saying this so I can be heard versus noise coming out of my mouth. Or am I the possum that just gets paralyzed by so much water in the canoe that I don't even know where to start? And if you understand where you're at, you'll know how to manage the stress and the point in the relationship that's causing a disconnect. And so in the story of Esther, the king is the cobra. Like in his moments of stress, he wants to just make a decision, even if it's the wrong decision. That's how he ended up being divorced. And the first time, he was so angry that his original queen did not want to come out that he's like, that's it, she's gone. It's like, that's kind of extreme. Your ask was kind of extreme. And then your decision for her not responding to your ask was a little extreme. But he was making decisions in stressful moments. Esther, she's always kind of been a runner. She's always kind of been a runner. Whenever a problem arises, it's like, oh, well, he hasn't called me in 30 days. I don't want to cause any problems. I don't want to face that conflict. It's been 30 days since he's talked to me. I'm just going to stay in my corner and stay away, and I don't want to cause any issues, and I don't want to raise any struggles. And so, and then her cousin, who became her adopted father, is like, you may be the only way to save an entire nation of people. And there's a part in the scripture where it actually says, maybe God allowed you to be queen for such a time like this. And I think about that scripture, and I think about how that relates to us. When we may feel like running, and we need to stop and think, maybe God put me in this job, in this career, with these coworkers and this boss for such a time like this. Before I decide to close the door on this job and start a new job, did God put you in this place for such a time like this? Or before you go into the office and you're ready to yell and scream at your boss, did God put you in this place for such a time like this? Or before you just do nothing about what's going on in the office, did God put you in this place for such a time like this? Your relationships, before you cut them loose, because trust me, I have 6 siblings, and I know how hard it is to manage family relationships. I've never in my life been able to keep all 5 of them. They rotate. They rotate in my life. And so it's a lot of work. And trust me, there's been many times where I've asked God, like, can I just get a new family? Like, can you just wipe these guys out and start fresh? But at the end of the day, it's like, did God put me in this family for such a time like this? The kids that you've been given, a lot of times we don't get to choose their personalities. Actually, we never get to choose their personalities. We don't get to choose how they react to stress or to point or to tension. And there's times where we just want to pull them out of whatever they're doing and just say, that's it, you're done. You're not doing any of this. Because it's easier for me to manage, you doing nothing than for you doing something. But you got to ask yourself, did God put you on this team, put you on this school for a time like this? And so this is the beauty of this story, is that Esther, although she's normally a runner, she had someone speaking into her life saying, did God put you in this place, give you this position, give you this power for such a time like this? And the answer to that question was yes. Because of Esther, her whole nation, her whole nationality was saved. Because God allowed her to be at a place where she could speak into the decision maker. And God allowed that decision maker to hear her voice. Now, it wasn't from being a deer and running. It wasn't from being a cobra and fighting. And it wasn't from being a possum and doing nothing. She had to overcome her natural animalistic behavior to have that conversation with the king, to talk him into reconsidering wiping out an entire nation. But if she never would have overcome her natural animalistic behavior, that never would have happened. And did you know that Jesus was born through that nationality? Do you know that Jesus himself was born through the Jewish people? That Esther, in that moment of history, was able to save. That's kind of an important point in this book. To know that Esther was the one who overcame her natural animalistic behavior and spoke to the king at the right time, at the right place, used the right voice, used the right moment. The king heard her and allowed for an entire nation to be saved. That later in the future, Jesus was born out of. And here we are today because of that moment. When is the last time? When is the last time that you sat down and took inventory of everything outside of your relationship that takes energy and resources, that takes your time, that takes your trust, and takes your relationship? When is the last time you sat down and took inventory of everything outside of your relationship? Everything that you do on a normal basis, everything that you do at home, laundry, dishes, yard work, grocery shopping, cleaning up, everything you do at work, working more hours, working, extra hours, everything you do with your kids, making them lunch, getting them ready, taking them to school, helping them with homework, taking them to sports, being there for practices, picking them up, dropping them off, when's the last time you've looked at all the surprises that happen in your life that you didn't plan for? Your car breaking down, the water heater breaking down, the things that you weren't planning for. When is the last time? When is the last time you've sat down and said, you know what, let me take a look at everything that I'm going over on a day-to-day. And is any of this creating stress in my life that's creating a distance in my primary relationship with God and creating a disconnect in my relationship with those in my life that matter? Because if you want to hold on to your primary relationship and keep that the primary relationship, and if you want to have meaningful relationships with people in your life that matter, it's going to be important for you to develop the habit to analyze and sit back and see what is happening in your day-to-day life that potentially could be driving you away from your primary relationship with God and from the relationships in your life that matter. There's a story in the book of Hebrews, chapter 12, verse 1. And it's about the Apostle Paul, who actually gives us this great advice that often we don't really get this wisdom anywhere else. And before I read to you that, I do want to help you understand that you can't fix an overpacked schedule with optimistic thinking. You just can't. As much as you would want it to automatically change somewhere in the future and you think so positively of like, it's going to change, you can't fix an overpacked schedule with optimistic thinking. You have to set limits in that. And so the Apostle Paul is probably one of the only people that actually took time to describe what we need to do with our life in order to keep those main relationships, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1 says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith, let us strip off every weight that slows us down. I'll just pause right now, because this is one of the greatest things you can walk away with today, is hearing God's words, God's voice through the Apostle Paul, giving you the best advice you can walk away with right now. It says, let us say it out. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down. Let's say this together. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down. Okay, this is where I need you guys to step up now. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down. Now without me. Let us. This is the Apostle Paul, who had his primary relationship be the focus of his life, his relationship with God, and then allowed that primary relationship to be a driving force to his other relationships, giving us advice, saying this: do less. Take a look do inventory of your life and do less. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down. Let us take a moment and analyze what's happening in our days, what's happening in our weeks, what's happening in our months, what's happening in our calendar, and take inventory of what's keeping us from our primary relationship with God and what's causing a disconnect in our relationships in our lives that matter, and do less. Because nowhere in the Bible does it say, you know what, add more to your life. Add more stress, add more chaos, add more to your schedule, impress more friends, impress more communities, impress more coaches, impress more people, impress. You're not going to find that. You're not going to find that in the Bible. You know where you are going to find that? In your day-to-day life, in your communities, in your circles, and the people that you're trying to impress that you really don't even like anyways, but you really want to impress them because they're in your life. And so here's where the Apostle Paul is saying, you know what? Do less. Do less. You want to make an amazing relationship with God? Do less. You want to have amazing relationships with those in your life? Do less. Focus more on your relationship with God. Focus more on the relationship with those in your life. And cut out the things that are keeping you from making that the priority of your life. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 23 says, you say I'm allowed to do anything, and you really are. You really are allowed to do anything. God gave you the ability to make all your choices. Honestly, if I'm being honest, I wish he would have tapered that a little bit. But in the reality, he did. He gave you the ability to make all your choices. It says, so you're allowed to do anything, but not everything is good for you. So what he's saying is you can make all the choices you're making. You have the freedom to do that. But just because you have the freedom to make all those choices doesn't mean you should. It says, you say I'm allowed to do anything, but not everything is beneficial. Everything that we do in our inventory of life, not all of it is going to be beneficial to the two most important things in your life, your relationship with God and the relationship with those in your life that matter. Whether that's your spouse, your kids, your friends, your family, extended family, whether that's work, co-workers, whoever it is, the relationships in your life that matter. Do less. So today, before you go, I'm going to ask you one thing for you to identify in your life that is keeping you from having a better relationship with God and a better relationship with those in your life that matter. What is one thing that you can do less of? What is one thing that you can write down right now and put it in your phone or put it in your notes, but that you would ultimately make a decision today and say, you know what, this one thing is actually keeping me from having a stronger relationship with God. Or this one thing is actually keeping me from having a stronger relationship with that person in my life that really matters. Is it doom scrolling? By the way, that's a real term in today's world. I learned it from a 13-year-old. Doom scrolling, where you just get lost in social media and you just get lost in the little videos because it's an escape point. Or is it the media, the news, that you can't wait to see what else is going on in the world with the politicians that are making decisions, whether you're on the side of like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad he's making these decisions, or whether you're on the side of saying, oh my gosh, he's going to control the world, or is it the media that's taking all your time and energy? Is it work, the extra hours that you're trying to put in? Is it, what is it? What is the one thing that you can sit and analyze and say, if I cut down on A, B, or C, I would have a much stronger relationship with God. And I would be able to benefit from the fruits of the Holy Spirit that ultimately would make my day so much greater. And not only that, would make my relationships so much greater. So I'm going to ask you to bow your heads, and I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. And I'm going to ask the band to come on up. And as the band comes up, with your head bowed and your eye closed, I'm going to ask God, through the power of the Holy Spirit, to identify that one thing in your life that is ultimately keeping you from making your primary relationship the primary thing in your day and creating a disconnect in your day-to-day relationships with the people in your life that matter. So with every head bowed and every eye closed, I am going to ask God to identify and help you to realize, what is it?
I just want to take a moment and say thank you for watching our service online. Whether you're watching it for the first time or you're watching it again because you enjoyed the service so much from the weekend, I'd like to take a moment and dive into our giving. Every week we give people the opportunity to give back and give to the local church so that God can continue to bless your lives and bless your finances. Here at South Hills, we believe that everything comes from God. We believe that He's the one that chose us and brought us into this world, gave us our gifts and talents and abilities. And I just want you to know that when we give, we are giving back what God has already given to us. If you've ever seen any of our envelopes at a South Hills campus, you'll see on there that it says, every week at South Hills, your generosity is giving people the opportunity to live a better story. And there's a scripture on there in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I want to encourage you today to click down below and set up your giving, whether it's for the first time or whether you're doing reoccurring giving. We have 4 ways to give here at South Hills. 1, you can do it in person at any of our campuses through an envelope. Or 2, you can actually text any amount that you would like to 84321. And the 3rd way is to download our Church Center app. I encourage you to do this one because the Church Center app gives you opportunity to stay connected with our church and your campuses. It's a great tool and resource for you to know what's going on. And the 4th way to give is to give online. You can go to southhills.org/give and you can set up your giving there. Whether you're a guest of our church or whether you are a member of our church, or whether you simply just like to watch our services, I encourage you to trust God with your finances so that He can bless and anoint your finances and you can be trusting God in this journey of living life to the fullest. I love you and thank you for watching our online service today.